Is perfect pitch a blessing or a curse? Yes. First of all, what is perfect pitch? Perfect pitch is actually nothing more than a memory for notes. For example, the standard note that we tune to internationally is the A above middle C, and the standard international pitch is a 440 hertz. So if I play this note, and someone has perfect pitch, and they just hear it without seeing anybody play the note and know which key that the person pressed, then they hear that pitch and they know, that's an A. So that's essentially what perfect pitch is. Now, you can imagine that it could be quite useful. So you hear something, let's say you hear a song on the radio, or you hear some piece of music, and you know immediately which notes are played. Now, it's not quite that simple for several reasons. Number one, not very well known is that there are degrees of perfect pitch. So, for example, I have perfect pitch, but my perfect pitch is kind of imperfect, to be perfectly honest. No pun intended. So what does that mean? Well, for me, my sense of pitch tends to be pretty limited to the piano. So if I hear other instruments, then it's much more difficult for me to recognize right away exactly which note has been played. And sometimes I actually need to translate the note in my mind to the sound of a piano, and then I can get it. Number two is my own sense of pitch can get relatively easily overwhelmed. So if I hear individual notes on a piano in particular, then I could generally identify them immediately. But if I hear a lot of notes at once, or if they're going by too quickly, then I just don't have time to process things and figure out which note I just heard. I do know people who hear everything instantaneously. They have no problems with that. And there are even people who, I've known musicians, or you could actually play like a cluster of notes and they'll immediately tell you exactly what was played. For me, that's actually overwhelming. So at some point, I can't distinguish really anymore. So that's why I say my own sense of perfect pitch is rather imperfect. So it's limited to the piano, and it's limited to less complex sounds. But other people have a more acute sense of perfect pitch in that they can deal with many sounds at once and rapid successions of sounds. Now, there's another way in which perfect pitch can be more perfect. Remember how I said that perfect pitch is nothing more than a memory for tones, or memory for particular notes, right? That depends on the notes that you learned generally as a child. So the standard international tuning is A, 440 hertz. There it is again. That means that the strings here are tuned so they vibrate at 440 times per second. Now, I live in Vienna, Austria, and in Vienna, there's a saying that says Vienna is different, and it's different also musically, in that the orchestra here, the famous Vienna Philharmonic, tunes not to 440, but to 443. Now, my piano from Bosendorfer uses the standard, and they tune to 443. They could also tune to 440, but I chose to stick with the Viennese standard now. So the note that I just played here is actually not 440, it's 443. So if you grow up here and you learn perfect pitch at a 443, then your sense of pitch is a little bit off compared to the 440 international standard. Now, that doesn't bother some people. So my sense of perfect pitch is not so perfect. If I hear a 440 and a 443, or if I hear even 440 and 441 next to each other, then I can tell one is very, very slightly higher. But the closer they are together, the harder it is for me to tell. I do know some musicians whose sense of perfect pitch is so sensitive that they instantly hear whether it's 440, 439, 441, whatever, they hear that difference immediately. So for them, perfect pitch can actually be a double-edged sword. So the moment that anything is a little bit off, then it could really bother them. And even me, if the piano is, I don't care if it's 439, if it's 443, whatever, there's a certain range that I have where I could tell, okay, to me that sounds like an A. But If I'm playing an older instrument with, let's say, a historical tuning in which A is lower, is sufficiently lower than 440, then it can really throw me off. And then I have to concentrate extra hard because I'm playing the notes. Let's say I'm playing an A, but I'm hearing an A flat. And that could be really difficult for me. But some people who don't have perfect pitch at all, this actually won't bother them. And they might not even notice the difference until you point it out. Now, others with a very sensitive, a very acute sense of perfect pitch, they'll be bothered if something is 441 rather than 440. So in that sense, it really is a double-edged sword. So what is the recommendation? I think, first of all, if you don't have perfect pitch, that actually does not really matter. I would not actually spend time trying to learn perfect pitch. What really matters is relative pitch. In a nutshell, relative pitch is simply recognizing where you are in the scale. So where the note is that you hear within the scale that you're playing. So if you hear you're in a major scale, you might not recognize that it's C major or D flat major or D major or whatever, but you can hear, I'm hearing the sixth note of that scale, the major scale. And then when you know, oh, this is in C major, you know that sixth note is A. So that's, in a nutshell, what relative pitch is. And it's recognizing the intervals between the notes rather than the absolute notes themselves. Speaking of the word absolute, incidentally, that's just a synonym. So perfect pitch and absolute pitch are synonyms. So I hope that helps, and I'll see you in the next lesson.